Now we have a very special presentation by a local gentleman, Andy Weiner, the owner of Toyin' Around. Andy has been a manufacturer representative since 1983 for the toy industry. I believe his story is going to resonate with many of us here today. Imagine losing 25% of your distribution channel all at once. Well, that's what happened to Andy. And he's going to share with us his journey and how teaching an older dog some new tricks helped him grow his business during this time. So, welcome to the stage, Andy.
Good afternoon, good late afternoon, I guess. Welcome to our fair city. You are getting the best of what Minneapolis is all about. If you stick around 3 or 4 weeks, you may need some boots. So first of all, I'm here because you're all wondering, who is this guy? I happen to know Barry, and being a road warrior myself, we commiserate over time. And he said, boy, you've got some interesting background, and you're a peddler like he is, and said maybe sometime when it may work out this coming year that when we're in town with our business solution meeting, you may be something interesting for our members to hear from you. And I'm like, seriously? Honestly? And I was like, okay, because what you're going to get is not high polished. There's no high gloss and there's no varnish on it. It's just a candid journey of an entrepreneur, a sales guy, and as I like to tell people who listen to me, it's just a world according to Andy. And sometimes you can say okay, and sometimes you can say it's okay. So what I'm going to ask is, if you've got any questions, let's bring it up or raise your hand right in the middle of this, because this is going to be more of a conversation. Hopefully, we're going to resonate with a few things, because I look around the room and I see a wide range of ages, but you get to a place in time where you're the oldest person in the room. I tell you, that doesn't feel good, but it's happening to me more and more. So the big question many of us ultimately ask is, how do you stay relevant in the world as it changes around you? And can you teach an old dog new tricks? So let me just give you, what happens is you wake up one morning and you have this fear that you're no longer relevant. And I think this, I've been listening today to some really interesting perspective on industries that I'm really not gainfully engaged in. But a lot of the things that I'm hearing about, consolidations and acquisitions and the sales data and the market, very, very interesting. And we just recently had our industry's business meeting here in June. And so some of the same topics, but the same information, but pointed in a little different receiving group. And I say, and when I talk today about me, I mean, for the last 30 years, 36 years this week, when I talk about myself, I really talk about my business too. It's kind of like all the same, and I would suspect that some of you out there is the same thing. So the questions that get asked are oftentimes about yourself, but you're asking them through the lens of what it means for your company. And certainly that's the case for me. So over the last 3 or 4 years, I literally woke up, and it's not really been 3 years, I guess it was 2007, 8, that I'll get to in a minute, but is you get a fear that you're no longer relevant. Your kids are growing up, and you start watching them be professionals, and you go, I can't even hold a conversation with them. They're talking about things that I have no idea what the world's going on around them, and they're friends. And then you say to yourself, boy, I've been an important cog of my industry's machine for years, and am I still that? Or are you, as my kids say, just over it, Dad? You're just over it. So let me just give you a quick about me. So who am I? And so I've been 45 years, this coming year anniversary, primarily in the toy business. 40 years of that, I spent the first 5 years sort of internal, but 40 years of that has been dealing with a wide range of channels, just like many of you represent. And over the last, since 1983, I've been an owner in a manufacturer's representative group here in the Twin Cities, and which means ultimately that Target Stores is my big ape today. And I've had very close relationships with a wide range of people in our vendor community, both from national brand big companies to individual startups. And I'm really not that familiar with your industry, but in my business, in our business, there's still a lot of people who have ideas, and they grow up one morning and wake up one morning and say, I'm going to take this to market, and they have not a clue. Not a clue. Don't have a clue how to get to Target or anybody else in our business. So for us, we become some of that conduit to figure out how to do that, but you're really dealing with complete neophytes. And then the other side, I get a phone call from a company that's hundreds of $1 million. So it's a very interesting business that way, and you really go back to the question that we'll pose today. But I'm also a member of the Toy Association's board of directors. I'm one of 15, so very similar to this group right here. I'm on the board of our industry. In addition to that, we have a rather large philanthropic part of that board, and I'm on that board also, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so here's just a couple things. First of all, my promise is not to bore you, and if I see people nodding off or whatever, I will try to do something that changes that attitude in the room. I also don't necessarily like to hear myself talk, so I'm going to try to be as concise as I can about this, but I won't dance, although my customers say that I do. What really important thing is that I've really prided myself in the last years, especially when you own your own company, to seek out places to learn, and because when you sit at the top of your company, it's too easy to believe your own bullshit. That's not offensive, is it? No, okay. Where you make up all the rules, and so if you're not careful, before you know it, people looking around you are going, well, why are you doing that? Because I want to. Well, that's not a good idea. It's like, okay. So we've just recently, and one of my colleagues is here because some of the stuff I couldn't do without her. We've actually reached out into the state of Minnesota and actually was funded with a grant, which you don't realize that there's monies out there to help us continually bring outside resources into our company. We're a small company, I don't necessarily have the resources. I don't have a big corporation like Avery where I can have HR classes. And so we recently did a class in communication, and I have to give Dr. Mike Kiefer a call out, who he talked about when we as salespeople, and in this case, me as a speaker, that everyone in the room doesn't listen the same. Because as Dr. Kiefer would express, there's actually 4 different types of people, and he classifies them as relators, socializers, thinkers, and directors. And I'm not going to go into the whole thing about this, but basically everybody fits into those categories. So not everybody hears me through the same lens. So I'm going to try, hopefully, to use some of the techniques that Dr. Mike taught me, that as I talk in a way that relates to everybody in the room. And at the end, if anybody can tell me afterwards, I'll stay and have a drink with you all, that you didn't know a darn thing what I said, please let me know, because I'd like to try to figure out where you fit so I can figure out how to fix that next time. Not that I think that I'm going to be invited back to do anything like this again. So basically the focus of what I want to talk about today is that no matter where you are, and I'm going to break this up into a couple different directions, is you have to change, evolve, and reinvent both your companies or yourself, or you die. And that is I don't care what business or what industry or where I've come across opportunities, if we're not in a constant state of change and evolution, we're not going anywhere. And I just like I said, I sat here this afternoon and I listened, and what I'm hearing about is all this evolution, all this change. And the questions that are coming up are, how do you stay with that? And the fact is, if you don't adapt, you're going to be gone. And as an owner of a small business, that's a frightening place to be. So let's talk about where my journey goes. We'll talk about my company and where did my journey begin. And There are people in the room old enough to know what that is, right? Okay? They couldn't find a picture of my favorite one, which is one that's sitting by the side of a road on an interstate that you drive up to, and it's got God knows what caked all over it, and you've got to like punch in your 10-digit calling card and hope that at the end of that call, you know, the phone rings actually, because I can't tell you how many times I went, oh shoot, and had to start and do it all over again. But you get that phone ringing on the other side, and you pray, pick up, because you got 200 more miles to drive, and I don't know when the next flight phone is going to be, and I don't want to go through this again. So the point is that it was upon a time, you know, where we were, like when I started, the tools of the trade, no cell phones, no fax machines, certainly no internet. Voicemail didn't even exist. So if you didn't get somebody on the end of the line, you got nothing. And computers were just beginning to come on, but it probably took up the size of this room, and small businesses, we didn't have rooms like this that we could put a computer in. And so what do we have? So what did we have? We had pinkies, right? Everybody remember we got paper people, right? Little pink notes. And when I come back, they'd be, you know, all over my desk. Love that. And it was okay that you didn't get back to somebody for a week. Can you imagine today one of your customers or one of your vendor partners not hearing from you from a week if they didn't know you were on vacation or indisposed? I don't think that's even possible. Text, right? Now, many of our vendors, our vendors text us, our target buyers, their email is so loaded that if they really want you to, and they trust you enough to give you their phone number, you can text them, which means you're getting text all night. Okay. And then, of course, things that like Snapchat, Twitter, on and on and on. And of course, social media. And we get an instant reaction to everything we do. Imagine if we weren't adapting to how we deal with those things. And in the case here, like in Minnesota, like we're all talking about today for you all, one massive account. Back when I was talking about having that phone, our territory, we had 10 viable accounts that were all million-dollar players. They're all gone with the exception of one. And they're building, if you haven't seen it, pretty pretty at night when the outside lights up. There's 36 stories there, and the 9 stories next door. But the basics remain the same: people, vendors, and customers. And each one of them must value you. You have to be a value-added component, and no matter what we do. So whatever the conversation is, the bottom line is, if you're not adding value, none of it matters. You don't have a business anyway. And so that's, you know, kind of the core of what you'll hear me talk about over the next few moments, is how do we remain relevant? And by remaining relevant, it means that we remain and we continue to figure out how to be value proposition. So you have to ask yourself the question, do I still belong? Especially when you get to a certain part of your career. Like I said, 45 years for me, and I'm looking at the golden years, whatever that looks like. But 45 years later, it's been a good road, but how about today? Am I ready to chalk it up? Is my company ready to chalk it up? Or is there other reasons for me to still remain relevant? And you have to ask yourself tough questions. Do I still belong here? So 2007, most of you probably remember pretty well because we had a recession soon after that. My partner, who was a brilliant guy, said to me, I'm done doing this. I can't stand, we were manufacturers reps, I can't stand this anymore. One of our vendors were driving him crazy, and he'd figured out that he was going to become a vendor. And he actually did become very successful as a manufacturer. We still represent him, and we're still fine. It was a very nice divorce. But at the time, that vendor that he was tired of was our largest vendor. A couple $1 million in revenue. And when he left, they left. So all of a sudden, my company lost like 50% of its overall volume. You want to talk about frightening moment. I had employees, I had space, I had a career. I spent a lot of time on my bicycle pounding down the trails. We have beautiful trails here, by the way, if anybody likes to run or ride bike, if you can find one. And it was, what am I do now? And part of that required me to do, call it a SWOT analysis, where I took a hard look and said, okay, got to ask all the right questions, or all the questions I even know. It's really required, a deep reflection about who I am. I have to ask yourself some pretty tough questions. What was the identity of my company? What was its purpose? What am I good at? Probably just as important is, what am I not good at? Where are my deficiencies? And what skill sets and services does my company currently not have that my customers and my vendors would like us to have? What am I not doing right? How did I get here? But more importantly, how am I going to get out of here? So what I did is I went out and talked to people. I went out and sought answers. First of all, I spent a lot of time looking in the mirror. My wife didn't like that much, but I took a lot of time looking in the mirror, asking myself the questions. First of all, did I even care? Could I have just figured out how to close up shop and sail off? Life had been pretty good to me. But I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I still, here I am 10 years later, by the way, talking to you all. So I was like, I think there's still more in my tank. I got more to do, but I'm not quite sure what that means. So I went out and asked just about everybody that would talk to me, including my customers. Okay, see? I still can't get along without help. And the questions that I asked were really, deep, and they were hard things to come to, because a lot of it revolved around the fact that the things that I was deficient at. But one of the things that came out of all this is I recognized that I didn't necessarily have to have the answers myself. That if I could, access good talent and bring good people around me, I could shore up all those things that I wasn't. But what I did find out, which was a really important piece, is experience and institutional knowledge has great value. And this, having been there before sometimes does count for something. And that made a big difference for me to say, okay, so I got that part covered. And then what I realized for our company, what we provide is a service, right? There's that value. How do we do all the back room? How do we understand Target? Do we have the ability to make relationships with Target? How do we about strategic thinking? And a lot of the questions that I keep hearing is about how do you pull strategy together, and not just so do you like this? No, you don't like this? Okay, pull something else out of the bag. But a strategy that every time you come forward, you know where the white space is, and you know what you're going to do to try to solve for that. But that doesn't just happen by accident. So one of the things, and this goes back to one of the first things I talked about, is still tremendous need for value that adds services to your vendors and your customers that they're too busy to figure out how to do for themselves. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges for almost all businesses today, is how do they continually create a value proposition for how they provide to their customer. And that goes even for the retailer. Many of our retailers fail today because they didn't figure out or can't still figure out how to present a value proposition to their customer, to their guest, as Target would say. It's not a very complicated thought process, but if you can't figure out how to be a value proposition to the people you're working with or people you expect to pay you, why be there? So for us, there was a new standard, and today we talk about all the technologies, new standards that required a whole wide range of things, more in-depth, sophisticated forecasting. I never thought that I'd literally employ the smartest people on earth. We have a forecasting department because, candidly, our vendors don't do a great job at it. And when Target does their forecasting, it's always to the way that they want their models. And I think there's many peddlers in the room here in factories. You've heard open to buy and all the reasons why they can't buy. But meanwhile, they're looking at business that's hanging, low-hanging fruit, as we like to say, that they just said, oh, sorry, we don't need that, until we march in our secret weapons, our analysts, and they go, well, let me show you this. And it's empirically defined for them. And we just came through what we call a chase cancel periods at Target, where Target's put all their orders out, and now we sit back and say, well, aren't you going to buy this? Well, why should I buy that? Well, how about this? You've only bought to about 50% of what you could probably sell. Is that what your shareholders want you to do? No. Here, write the order. And guess what? We got the orders. So the bottom line for us in this conversation is about service. And service means value. So what came next for us? It was time to be totally honest, which we did. We needed to commit to investment. Sometimes not the easiest thing to do, and in this case, it directly comes out of my pocket. And the money and the lines weren't there necessarily with the large one leaving, but it was like we weren't going to get to that place unless we put the investment in, and that investment also means people. So we ended up building a 3-year strategy that just actually turned into a 10-year strategy that we're just about coming through right now, and it's going to be in a fabulous next period of strategy, of planning that doesn't necessarily involve me. But we had 40% turnover of our employees. We reinvented our entire workspace in the middle of all this, because as I was looking at it, and you start bringing on younger and new employees and try to define what does the work environment of the future, just because this is where we've been doesn't mean this is where we have to be. So what did? We started talking to our employees. They like flex time, and I'm going to try to categorize our youth today, but the M word is out there, right? The millennials. But we can't forget that they're the largest group of Americans to come right now. But the fact is, we kept asking, like, why aren't you in the office on Fridays? Because we had flex days, because they like to go to coffee shop, they like this, they like that, So what did? We created in our office a coffee shop type atmosphere, not a whole office. We still have a pretty traditional office. But now they come to our office because they feel comfortable there. And oh, by the way, the people they like to work with are also there. So we had to, obviously adapt. And I'm going to tell you, these were not my ideas. I have been the president and the leader of my company for over 25 years, and these are not my ideas. Because what I recognized was that in this process is that I needed to get younger. Code word, be careful, can't use that very easily, right? Because it could be reversed, right? I guess I'm the old guy that could push it out. But the bottom line is, I decided and I recognized that I needed fresh ideas. I needed new ideas. I needed relevant ideas. And that relevancy came with youth. It's kind of hard when you think about 30 years old and call them youth, right? But they are. My grandkids to me are young, right? But 30-year-olds, they already got 15 years worth of business experience. Really valuable. And taught me a lot, opened my eyes to things I had no clue about, like the new glass offices we have and all this stuff. But I got to tell you, when it was all said and done, we also have just, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Traction, EOS operating system. We brought an actual big company type philosophy into our company. We've got 12 employees. And the results was in 2019, we were Inc. magazine best workplace. And we've got over 40% growth in our overall bottom line. And we've walked through a management transition that has me in a place where very shortly I won't be calling any of the shots. So if they want me, they can call me, or I'll be around if they need me. But the bottom line is that this whole process has allowed me to stay relevant while becoming irrelevant. Because the company, and I don't know if there's manufacturers reps in the room, so much of it is based on my reputation and my years in the business. And we really very clearly have a company name that's toying around that has nothing to do with my name. Because I wanted to try to build on a business that had a purpose and a reason to exist that was beyond me. So transitioning from that, let's talk a bit about something that would be parallel to many of you in the room, and that's the toy industry, right? Which is your business and office products. There's some parallels, and I don't know if some of you may have crossed over some of this, but so the toy industry today is $28 billion. There's 40 years ago, there was 50 plus major wholesalers and retailers. Some of you I could, depending on where you are in the country, you know what I'm talking about. There were the Ames of the world, there were the Caldas of the world, there were Indulgence of the world. There's on and on and on. And today there are 3. Walmart, Target stores, and Amazon. 80% of all of the toys sold in America. 80%. 5 to 10 vendors in our industry are $500 million plus. You got the Mattel and Hasbro's that are $1 billion, and they're really more entertainment companies today. And then you've got MGA. You may have heard Isaac talking a lot about the tariffs and all that stuff, and it's a privately held company. It's about $1 billion. And then the next largest group of all of our vendors are about 50 to 200 million. So it's a very entrepreneurial business. There's some giants, but it's very much led by just average business people. And another analogy for many of you, I'm sure, the barriers to entry have never been harder. Because when you've got 3 gatekeepers, try to bring innovation. Try to convince somebody to try something when they're trying to be judged on how, their basis point growths are not in minus digits or minute digits. So we're also, on the flip side, are shadowed by the video game industry, which is about 43 billion. And I'm sure you've all got kids and grandchildren and so forth, so you see this business. And 30 years ago, the industries decided to be tracked separately. So the MPD, which is our major way of tracking retail, tracks both the video game business and the toy business separately. But they still share the same dollars, many of the same customers. And today we've got monster institutions like Call of Duty and Fortnite that are almost like indigenously embedded in our society. I mean, people are literally making a living being Fortnite players. So, and in that business, it's really dominated by Microsoft and Nintendo and really big businesses. So what I want to just, briefly again, just talk about the toy business a little more. So we're still led by very traditional brands like Hot Wheels, Barbie, Lego, the Cabbage Patch. But you guys talked about tariffs a little while ago. In our industry, 85% of all of the toys made in the world come out of China. All the expertise is there, all the money's there, and the logistical support, and on and on. So we're in that last category, by the way, and I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but so our tariffs have been delayed, but it's a business that I've been traveling to Asia since the early 80s, and it's impossible to think about how we're going to separate ourselves from China at this point in time. But it's caused a ripple effect. And again, I'll go back to relevancy, and is that once upon a time it was all done here, and we lost that over the years with the cost of labor in the United States. And a Barbie doll today, if we weren't making it in China, would cost about $20 for a $4 Barbie doll, and we all know that the American public wouldn't put up with that, and it just followed the money train, which took it to China, where it's made for a couple of bucks and sells for $4 or $5. But the message along through here that I just want to make sure that I'm consistent with is that all along the way, we as an industry, we as business people in the industry, we're forced to adapt. Adapt to where we have to produce our goods, where we could sell them, adapt to a whole new climate. I had to learn a whole new way to do business when I had to start going to China in the early 80s. Just the language, forget the language barrier, but how to think Cantonese, much less speak it, to where you're doing business with people that have no clue about what America is all about. And over the years, many of those same companies that started out as pure Chinese companies now have massive US marketing companies. I live here in Minneapolis because we represent one of the biggest companies in China, or in Hong Kong, called Playmates Toys. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. Ever heard of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? You're looking at the turtle guy. I've launched, actually the only guy, along with the chairman, that have launched Turtles every time that we brought it back. So I've been around with them that long. It's a Chinese-owned company, a Hong Kong Chinese company. The original Turtle was funded by the Chinese owner of that company, And they have been the partner with Nickelodeon and all ever for the whole way. And so, you know, we've been through a lot of different changes in all this. And again, I don't want to get too far askew because let me pull myself back in. Focus, right? We had 97. Those of you that are familiar is when China took Hong Kong back over from the British reign. And we had to go through major changes in that point in time. We thought that everything was going to change. But you know what? We adapted, we changed, and we moved on. Well, we're being faced with it again. And as a board member, our organization, and I'm not quite sure, we have I'll talk about it a little bit more in depth, but we're very, very deeply involved on the governmental side of supporting our business. So the bottom line is that bottom line, I used that word a few times, haven't I? The challenges that face our industry is the fact that our kids are also always aging out. So we're in a place where we have a changing audience all the time. So we're reinventing ourselves every 2 to 3 years by bringing new products because we've already aged our children out and that's old news for the new child. So reinvention is the bedrock of our business. 3 years is about the average lifespan of our products. And I know that's quite different than what's in this room, but it forces us to be very forward-thinking about everything we do to try to understand trends. And some things are, you know, retro-type things do come back and forth. Our tooling is amortized in its first year. Because if our manufacturers don't amortize their tooling in the first year, chances are they may never get it amortized. Because something like 70% of new products don't make it to year 3. So it's a bit of a tightrope. And what's happening today is our industry is really at an inflection point because today, and it's always been, you know, having access to kids' eyeballs. You know, we talk about advertising, you know, that Google conversation about, or Amazon, where the revenues are coming from advertising. The advertising industry and the way that we deliver content to kids is changed dramatically. We're now facing whoops. There's a slide missing there. Yep. Sorry. That slide is, are you familiar with a young man named Ryan? You know who Ryan is? He's my buddy. He's 8 years old. I don't know, Ryan's going to make 50 million this year? He's a YouTube influencer. He's on YouTube. We're just so fortunate to be Ryan's toy outlet. So Ryan is one of our company's best little buddies. I've actually spent some time with Ryan. He's a really nice little kid, but he has no idea that he's got a Brinks truck packed up behind the house. It's unbelievable. But that's changed, and it's changing our industry dramatically as we go, because we talk about gatekeepers. In the day, we all had lots of gatekeepers, but now you got a YouTube camera. You shoot that YouTube video, and you turn around, and up it goes. And within hours, people are watching that YouTube video, and we're going direct, and we're going right direct to the kids. And there's some issues around that. It was just announced this week that YouTube paid a fine. They're trying to figure out how to regulate this because we have COPA, you know, all the stuff that all the main networks are all heavily regulated, but YouTube's not. It's free speech. And they're trying to figure out how do we get our hands around this as an industry. But in the meantime, there's millions and millions of dollars being made. He was reported last year to have made $50 million on his YouTube advertising revenue. And trust me, he's selling over $200 million in toys where he's getting royalties. So 50 million is just scratching the surface. And we're talking about billions of views. We would spend, those of you that are, you know, that spend advertising on TV, I mean, what does it take to get 1 billion impressions? I mean, we're talking now that Ryan's in a couple of billion impressions, and he's not the only one. We represent FGTV and a bunch of these other companies. But what's happening is it's reforming our industry. Again, I didn't 2 years ago have a clue that this was going to happen. Got to be ready to be a reinvent. You got to understand the value, and you got to understand how to be where the kids today want to be or are going to be. And so our industry is adapting very, very quickly to this direct access to our consumers. But it's really unregulated territory, and we really don't know where the government's going to come in on this, but we'll see. So the Toy Industry Trade Association is what I belong, one of the places. It's a 100-year-old organization. But like everything else that I've been talking about, it's had to go through reinvention over and over again. It initially was called the Toy Manufacturers Association. Only manufacturers could join. Main concerns were credit and government regulation. Then it turned into the Toy Association, which was really about manufacturers, and we finally said, okay, if we're going to be in the business, we can invite the retailers in, or wholesalers. So we did that, and then we added the licensors, Disney's, Nickelodeons of the world, and later on, actually, I was part of a group that actually let people like me join. It was like, we should have our reps on board, which they did. And then today, it was been rebanded to the Toy Association, and we serve a multitude of roles, much of which are about government affairs, lobbying efforts. We spend millions of dollars in lobbying in Washington. We're in the middle of the fight with the administration on tariffs. That really is a tax on the American public, but that's neither here nor there. Credit, education. Our trade shows are managed by the Toy Association. And in addition to that, we have our Toy Association Foundation, which is a philanthropic arm that is led by a couple of different organizations. We have a Toy Bank, which is 1,500 companies that donate toys. So in kind last year, there was $22.5 million worth of toys that were donated by these companies that we end up then bringing back to the public in partnership with a couple of different organizations. One's called CASA, which is a court-approved kid. These are basically kids that are in homes appointed by the courts. We have direct connections to our community. We put on events during the year. We were in Chicago, and there's all kinds of public service. So we have $22 million in public service, actually $18 million. So we're a 501c3, but and the interesting story about being on that board is that, again, the changing marketplace and the changing environment in America constantly have us in a case of reinvention. And we're going through a major piece of that now. So quickly shifting to a different story. Heard about this today, a number of you talk about, and this is that story. You're familiar with Toys R Us? Toys R Us is no more. And it's probably relevant to this group because this was our category killer. This was our Staples. This was our Office Max. This was our big dog on the street. This was over 20% of the market share of our industry. And it's gone. And the company that I'll compare this to right now is Target stores, which of course is a more general merchant. But they serve many of the same consumers, and many of the Target stores are not far from where there were Toys R Us stores. And Target and Toys R Us did battle together, but there was room for both. Today, Target picked up a good portion of that business, but still the biggest missing piece for this in the industry is they were our partner. Their business was the toy industry. So we talked about trade barrier. We talked about how hard it is to get incubators to come into the business. When we had Toys R Us, that was easy. You walk in their doors and they're in the business of buying toys. You could figure out how to collaborate. Little tiny brands that had no chance all of a sudden had a chance, and many of them have turned into significant properties that you probably would all know today. So they had, and here's the sad part about this story, just to quickly bring you up to speed, and some of you may know, some may not. They had about $3 billion worth of sales. Nice account. But what happened was they lost their growth strategy because they basically had covered the world and covered the US. So with $3 billion in sales, they were dropping about 500 to 600 million bottom every year. Not a bad business, paying some dividends. Wall Street didn't like it. And I heard somebody ask before about private equity buying some of these characters. Well, here's the problem with private equity. Private equity came in and bought Toys R Us, took a public company and made it private. What happened after that? There was additional $3 billion in unlocked assets that were hiding inside that $3 million profitable company that was dropping $500 or $600 million a year because they owned their real estate, or 80% of it. They owned their DCs. Guess what? What did private equity do? Stripped it all out. So we ended up with a $3 billion company that now had $6 billion in debt. Toys R Us is gone today because that debt was just too much to handle over the next 7 years. And again, it comes back to Andy's point. They weren't able to stay relevant because while Target made an announcement, and those of you that they were going to put $7 billion into their store infrastructure, and by reinventing themselves, when they were wobbling a little bit, they put $7 billion into their web business. They put $7 billion, all part of the same $7 billion, but they put $7 billion in reinventing their stores to where they have pickup and a wide range of other elements that they decided to talk to the American public. What do they need to be valuable, to be relevant in this marketplace? They had the money. Toys R Us talking to their guests and asking them about what they need to be doing. They didn't have 2 red cents to put together. And then finally, when one of the debtors said, I've had enough of this, down they went. So our industry was faced overnight with a loss of literally our best partner from a purely interest standpoint, plus 20% of our overall business going through the door. So what's happened is that the industry's had to change, and it changed our landscape forever. So Target has become a great partner, and Target has picked up 25, of the 20%, Target's picked up 25 to 30% of that market share. Walmart's picked up maybe about that or so, and then Amazon picked up the rest for the most part. So the fact that Amazon has been hanging out there, and they've been obviously in the game, but they haven't made any money at the toy business, which is one of the big problems with Target also and with Walmart, is that they're really placed a whole lot of emphasis on their online business, but the fact of the matter is it's not profitable. It's still not. They're actually chasing our vendor base to try to help them figure out how to do that, right? We have the 6% accrual. Have anybody do business with Target? And where we literally have to pay a surcharge for everything we sell online, at retail cost. I still figure that out, but they got that done. Because everything they ship out the door to try to be competitive, they're really not making any money at it. But the fact is that 83% of some number like that last fall and the holidays were still connected to bricks. So even though the online component is important, the bricks still represented over 80% of Target sales. So the Target's approach to this business now is Target sells anytime, anywhere, anyhow. So you can find it in the store, find it outside the store, have them bring it outside to the store, whatever it takes for the consumer to buy it, that's how they're going to get to you. But again, that's because they figured out how to stay relevant. The model that they were working on for years wasn't working, so they changed it. The other thing about Target is, and most of you are probably Target shoppers, is that there was a period of time where everybody talked about the Target quiche, the Target, and Target kind of got away from it. And they tried to become, a little more Walmart type, but they lost their identity with the consumer. And you began to hear about, is Target in trouble? So what did Target do? Listen to the marketplace, went outside, looked at their own talent, decided that their own talent wasn't good enough, went out and got a guy from Nordstrom's. And today their own brands are on a resurgence like we've never seen before, and they're absolutely kicking it. And by the way, that's one of the ways that they fight Amazon, because those Target great brands that your families love to buy, the only place they can buy them, they buy them at Target. You can't buy them on Amazon. So there's still a very huge commitment to understanding where their guests are. And the same thing for our business, by the way. While Target's business has been up over $600 million in toys with the advent of Toys R Us going down. My business is up 50%. That's a pretty big number, because we figured out how to be part of Target's reinvention. When I went back to where we talked about, I first started here, and I'm going to be wrapping up shortly, because I see some eyes fluttering, is that how did I stay relevant? Well, my industry knowledge and institutional history was one of the places that they came to access when Toys R Us went down. Because I do have more, my business is here, but I've had experience nationally. I've been around long enough that they sat and asked me, help me understand what they're doing out there, what they did do out there. How do we figure out how to get that here? What pieces of that? So because I had made myself, I'd reinvented myself and identified myself as being an industry influencer and somebody who had, I can't do a pivot table, don't ask me to go with any of that stuff, or I don't have a Twitter handle, but when it comes to having value in our business because I have institutional knowledge, Target knows where they go for that. And me and along with a couple other colleagues in the industry, we helped bring them to where they are today, which is now a very serious player, well, 50% greater for us than they were just 2 short years ago. So the overall moral to the story is bricks still matter, and if you can continually hold that covenant with your customer, they'll remain loyal, but you need to make investments in your business because it never stops, and the word is reinvention, reinvention, reinvention. So what did it take me to the end of all this? Is how do you connect with your workforce in the face of an ever-changing landscape, right? This is actually the mission statement of our company today, because we try to look every day at how we serve our customers and how we make ourselves distinguished from any other sales organization. How do we serve our vendor partners in a way that is unexpected and provide unparalleled value? How do we as employers provide a work environment that has our people fully engaged and self-actualized? I can't say that enough. Your company's lifeblood is your employees. And figuring out how to make sure that you're speaking to them and then that they hear that you actually are speaking to them will only pay dividends. How can we as a firm be good partners to the communities, to our firm and employees and other partners that we live in and around? We give 10% of all of our company profits to local charities. Be in a constant state of inquiry. Keep your ears open 24/7 for feedback. Know where to look for the unknowns. Be aware that we boomers, there's a fair amount of boomers in the room, and Gen Xers, and there's a fair amount of you, are being followed by a large group of millennials. They see the world very differently in a very good way. For those of you in the room who share my status as a boomer, recall when you were younger, there were no superiors who sought you out for advice. Never. They were the senior advisors. They were the givers. They were the knowledge givers. Not this generation. They have knowledge and skills that if we're smart, we'll look to access them. I can't tell you how many times during the day I go and I look for somebody who's 30 years younger than me because I'm stuck. In the beginning, pride said, don't dare do that, or how could I ask them? Now it's stupid not to because I can't get the answer. There is knowledge and awareness to where it acquired amongst my young employees that is a lifeline, right? I've just said that. Surround yourself with talent that can add critical skill sets and knowledge. So understand what you're not and go out and find what you are, what you need to be. Teach you to make aware of things that you know that you don't exist. Cover your weaknesses with people who do have the answers. And in summary, if you take anything away from these moments with me, please listen to this. Old dogs can learn new tricks, or more accurately, recognize when it's time for a new trick and empower someone else to perform it on your behalf. Thank you.
Andy, thank you and well done. I'm going to start this off. I have a question, but I'll start with a comment first. Of everything you said, I just figured out that I have to make my 2.5-year-old granddaughter an influencer, and we could probably all retire. So I'm a manufacturer's rep. We spoke on the phone, and you talked about change, and you talked about change in your company. You also talked about having a stable of manufacturers who were your partners. You lost one big one. You had a bunch left. How did they partner with you and kind of help you along with the change that you had to go through? We have many manufacturers reps and many manufacturers who they represent in the room. And there is probably most of us in this room would tell you that in some cases the rep group model hasn't changed since its inception last century. Now that's not exactly true for some groups or if not all groups, but I think what manufacturers reps today in the office product space face is a challenge to produce, to hit quota, to do what the manufacturer is asking us to do, with not having that kind of relationship to where we could say, hey, wait a second, we got to step back here because the world's changing on both of us, and we're not changing fast enough together. So how were you able to partner with your manufacturers to say, listen, we're going to go through a little bit of a change here, or a big change here, and this is what my vision is at the backside of this?
Well, first of all, we're really fortunate as a firm that we've got some long-term relationships. Like Playmates, for instance, which is a massive company. I've represented them since 1983, so that's a long time. And over those years, trying to be the best partner, and basically, even when they've had lean years, we did what we had to do for them, regardless of whether I was getting paid or not. So, and I think something you just said is really, really important to understand too, and that is that we're going through this right now. I would love to figure out a way to redefine the word manufacturer's rep, because it's almost like a 4-letter word. And I know you got manufacturers in the word, because in the day that was get a meeting, drag the sales manager in, and hopefully make a sale. Well, that is such a small part of what we do. And in fact, we've actually changed that, because we actually have a full consulting firm part of our business too, because there's times now, Michelle and I have been working on a project for the last year where we've got a vendor who has not been at retail, is a massive supplier. Some of you may know who it is, so I won't tell you, I won't say it, but they've lived in a space very successfully, and then they want to come here because they've been venture capital money, they have to grow. And I'm not going to give them that secret sauce or figure out how to do that without getting paid. So we're giving them complete guidance and helping them figure all this stuff out. But we're working on it literally on a more of a consulting type contract. But back in the day, my vendors still understood. And this is where, like I said, during that same time was when I was when that happened with the large, and it was a company that we had partnered with 13 years before and filled a white space for Target. So it was all kind of private label. And so we had provided all that. And what had happened was that the industry was shocked when they left us, for one thing, because of the fact that they knew that they didn't get there without us. It happens, understand. Fortunately, I wish it was a little cleaner, because here in Minnesota, we've got really good laws. And after 13 years of friendship, it didn't break up so well. But we did just fine, which is too bad. No, that was good for me, but too bad that it couldn't have been cleaner. But what happened was my vendors, as you ask, knew, because we're going back 10 years ago, so I was in my mid-50s, so they knew that I was either going to maybe scale it back, pack it in, or I was going to figure out how to take it forward. So what my vendors, how they bought in was that they knew that I was going to go through a reinvention period. I explained to them that I had done an analysis of like where I was and where I wasn't, and I talked about what it would take me to do to actually make us 2.0, the next rep firm, the next best thing, and that take that negative of having lost that big line into a positive that was going to give me actually capacity to bring new vendors on board. And the word went out to the industry that we were now available for things because we lost this vendor who cost a whole bunch of different categories. And it was because of the commitment to making that investment that my vendor partners stayed with me. Hopefully that answered your question.
Let's open it up. Questions?
They got cocktails on their mind.
They got a little while before cocktails. Anybody? Travis. Andy, Travis is with 3M.
Andy, sorry if I missed it. You talked about the 80-20, right? Of three companies selling 80% of the volume. What do you do, or what did you do with the other 20%? Do you call on them? Do you continue to call on them, or how does that work?
That's a really excellent question. And in my case, our firm's case, I've got a 25-year employee who has basically lived and taken care of that space and is beloved in my business, not my business, but I'm talking about in the industry for what he does. His name is Mark. And I don't know what we'll do. Mark's in his early 50s. I don't know what we'll do if Mark ever decides to go. But he has that 20% of our customers, gives them old-fashioned love. I mean, just the way, he still goes in carrying his bag, and he's out. I don't know where he is today. His office was dark. But, he's out on the road. But what we did for him is that, because Mark is more that old school like I am, and most of his customers are, but we gave Mark the same skill sets that we give Target. So Mark has an analyst. Mark has a merch coordinator. So he has a team that when he goes into that 20% that isn't necessarily quite the oil machine that Target is, they get service. So when we get people actually recommending us for lines that come from our 20%, because they get service from Mark that Mark doesn't even know where it comes from. He doesn't know where it comes from because he's got that kind of support. But that's what we decided, was that 20% was still important, and they needed to get the same love that we give our bigger customers. And it works really, really well. I mean, the yield is not great out of that group, but it's still, as far as my vendor's concerned, it's still breadth of the territory. And some of them have been customers of ours for years, and we still love them. How many customers? Michelle, help me. 15, 12, 15? Some of them are, where you live here? So, like Blaine, Fleet, those are, and there's all those type of farm stores in there's some of them that are pretty nice. I mean, together, aggregately, they have some serious business, but they're a different type of customer. They don't require anywhere near what, you actually can go in and write a purchase order. I haven't walked out of Target stores with a purchase order in 15 years. Michelle was a buyer at Target. I don't think she ever wrote a purchase order in her life.
I don't even have a form for a purchase order anymore. I wouldn't even know how to do that.
No.
Anybody else? Andy, thank you so much. It was a spectacular talk. We appreciate it.